So after yesterday's statement about legacy, Maya's legacy at 12 years old, about going to Africa and starting an orphanage, taking care of children. Many of you have asked me, some of you have asked me in the past 24 hours. So what happened, Maya? How did you end up in Hawaii? How did you end up in this luxurious vacation environment and doing nothing about orphanages and you don't even have kids? Why did your life go so different? And I would like to answer that question actually, because at 20 years old, when I finished school in Hungary, studied economics, it was very clear for me that I'm going to go and travel the world first. And the Iron Curtain just fallen down, the Berlin Wall has fallen down, and there is a lot of hesitation in my generation even to leave the country and find work somewhere else in Europe. But I did. I applied for one job, and that's all I needed, because that one job has accepted me. And I went to Scotland, where I studied special education in a Christian community. What has really attracted me about this Christian community is that I grew up in a social system, in a very communist home. We never talked about Bible or God or anything like it. People had their own moral standards, and it was pretty nice actually, but not perfect, certainly not perfect. But the ideals that my parents lived up to and how they raised us were definitely giving away a Christian background, a very strong one. Now they were already growing up in a communist country, so it was the third generation past that. My grandparents may have prayed the Christian way and then were raised the biblical way when they were little children, but they were already very young, still very young, when the Second World War was over and a communist socialist system in Hungary had taken place. So there was absolutely no residue or influence of Christianity, not even in school or in the streets or in my home. The terrors of wanting to wipe out any sign of a biblical life in Europe had taken place by then. It was very nicely set in. Why was I going to say this? Because I applied for this job that required me to be Christian, and I gave it a shot. A Christian community taking care of disabled children in Scotland. As a 20-year-old, I knew that I had to learn about good parenting and how to raise children. And I couldn't have gotten a better education. I didn't only feel good about the culture I was going to, the work I was going to do, the studies I was going to do, but I felt extremely good because finally I felt like I was on track. While my family and my environment expected me to become an economical expert, and I did study 4 years of economics in a Hungarian college that left me with A-levels diploma. It was during this change of Hungary transitioning from the economical basics, the financial, the whole country was changing from a one-level banking system into a two-level banking system. from a communist country where the Commonwealth was the major owner of all properties into, through perestroika, changing into private sector possibilities. Private sector, private sector, private sector. There were new entrepreneurial ventures, small businesses and small business owners showed up. People got acquainted to credit cards and banking cards, which we have never seen before, not during my school days. When I was studying economics, banking cards only belonged to SEOs and only for official use. By the time I have finished school and taken my exams, anybody could own a banking card and have their own bank account. Until then, most people have kept their cash at home under the pillow. Now, during this stage in the country, I studied economics for 4 years. And there was such an enormous amount of confusion about it. Our teachers didn't know what to teach. Our exam instructors didn't know what to do with us in the exam rooms because they knew that the subjects we had been tested on was not what was taught to us. I was in my 4th year in academy when all the new system has taken place. Finally, our history books were changed. The 20th century Hungarian history were totally rewritten, and our how finance is supposed to be run. I wasn't able to do the bookkeeping anymore. I studied because I studied social system bookkeeping, and I had to take my exams in a capitalist system, private sector bookkeeping for small business owners. I didn't even know who small business owners were. Private sector did not exist when I was studying and taking my classes. It was terribly confusing, and it left most of my classmates, or the entire year students, devastated. There were 2 brilliant students among us who could pass these exams without any difficulty because they already had financial institutional jobs. They were already had so-called, they had been already hired, and those who have hired them supplied them with information and study books. But a student is just barely can go through school out of financial or whatever. For me, it was devastating because I just finished paying for my books, and those were very, very cheap books in the social system. For the capitalist system, for the books we have been studying from, we had to pay 20 times as much, and on top of it now, the state wasn't going to cover our education. We had to have tuition to pay too. That is just in the course of 4 years. I must say, I not only got devastated, no, I cannot imagine going to university or wanting to take up this profession in my country. I started looking around, what am I going to do? I went to places that I'm going to sell theater tickets and organize social events. But they wanted to send me back to school. And I was so ready just to make money so I wouldn't have to live with my parents anymore. And I was 20. So when I have finally made up my mind that I'm going to make use of my English classes and I'm going to move to Scotland, I was elated. I was back on track. I haven't seen kids for like 6 years by then. Because when I was younger, there were always kids to babysit around. But then as they grew older, parents didn't hire me anymore. They didn't have me anymore. And I was involved in studying economics and being my father's secretary. I was totally isolated. There were no kids in my life. Going to Scotland put me back, kids into my life again. And there were They were disabled children in wheelchairs, with epileptic seizures, with severe disabilities, with autism, with hysterical behaviors, with ADDs and ADHDs. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the job. I enjoyed that I was in a new country. I enjoyed that I was in a Christian community where people did talk about Bible and Christianity and God. I enjoyed that when I had questions, I could ask them. And I enjoyed that every Saturday night we sat down around a white tablecloth table and we studied the Bible together. Those were my favorite times. Legacy. At 12 years old, I made up my mind I'm going to do orphanages in Africa. And I've taken up my studies in Scotland. After 4 years finishing the seminary of curative education, halfway through my father passed away. That has put a huge dent into my studies. So I didn't receive an actual formal diploma because my requirements were not completed time-wise. What I have felt inspired to do is to continue. Now that I know the curriculum, the Waldorf curriculum from kindergarten to 12th grade, I wanted to work with adults from age 18 to 28, which was considered the young adult, their profession and trade learning period of life, and considered to move to a village. Then I have heard that there was something, a youth guidance training in America, in Pennsylvania. Applied and moved there for 6 years, which is quite a surprise to me because when I arrived, I've been informed that there is no seminary starting because I was the only applicant in the whole community, and I'm just going to hang out and learn by apprenticing. 6 years in youth guidance, and of which 5 of them I lived with a young woman who was both deaf and blind, had teaching experience in college. I had my own class for 2 years and learned an awful lot about actually running a residential home, running Christian communities. I got a lot more involved in the work of those who actually created and run the place, with a whole new perspective about fundraising and fundraising events. Biblical entrepreneurship for me started there. Until then I was on my stipend, but I transitioned into seeing how funds are being raised for the whole community, and why are we on stipend, and why do we need volunteers to run the school when the parents whose children go there pay such a high price of for the students' tuitions. Why I am telling you this is there was 11 years of experiencing biblical entrepreneurship in my life without really actually even knowing the word biblical entrepreneurship. Is because of what surrounded me. And I was working with children and I was working with young adults and learning to be that mother substitute, you could say, the educational role model. It doesn't mean at all that I have abandoned my ideas of orphanages in Africa, but it transformed for me. I have realized that it was tremendously hard already in a developed country to maintain a project like that, and it needed tremendous amount of knowledge, insight, experience, and charisma of working with others. I fully respect the people who can take off projects of that magnitude, and this particular school around the world has more than 90 campuses around the world. It's huge. And every single one of them is an independent entity inspired by the others. Tremendous work. And tremendous respect I have for those who are behind those accomplishments. Legacy. Biblical legacy. Yesterday we discussed what legacy was. Your own legacy for your life, legacy for a Christian legacy, a Christian entrepreneurial legacy, and biblical legacy. Huge difference. You're probably aware of how many Christians today totally don't or ever read the Bible. There is very few Bible studying Christians in the world. They go to church, they live the best life they possibly can, and they kind of assume what's in the Bible. Not the same as actually getting down to study. I don't say that every single day of my life I study the Bible. Sometimes my Bible study consists of writing a blog and researching my material, and I write a blog post. Sometimes studying the Bible means that I am part of study groups. Right now I'm not doing it either. That means that I need to sit down at home and read it for myself and study it for myself. And sometimes what it means is to consider certain group of people who are in front of me and look for the answers for them and for their problems. And I need to research it, look into the Bible, and make a video about it. So Bible study can take up many shapes and forms. The most popular one, and personal growth-wise can be just as incredibly enriching, is devotionals. But if it comes to devotionals, I very rarely find us rewarding to read a third-party devotional that is referring to the Bible in one sentence than it is to read the pure Bible text and write my own journal about it. That is a whole lot more effective. And I do put a lot of emphasis here on Bible study, because the more time you spend in the actual Word of God, the more you begin to adopt His mind. And that is the dividing factor between Christian entrepreneurs and biblical entrepreneurs. There are many Christians out there who pay their tithe and go to church in the weekend, and that's it. They are business owners, and they come from a good heart, and they want to give back. They may even donate money for good purposes. But what they are doing in their business has nothing to do with a biblical foundation. Either they are employees, or I'm going to tell you something shocking here. I have been to this Christian business men and women's convention. In break time, I show around and shake people's hands and introduce myself. And there was this guy who introduced himself that this is my name. And I asked him, and so what do you do? And he gives me his card. He says, I make adult movies. We are in a Christian convention for businessmen and women, and I got a shock. And he could see the shock on my face. He says, well, I give a lot of money to Christian purposes, for good reasons, good purposes. I don't want to break the spiritual journey of that gentleman. I wouldn't say anything that is discouraging him from what he's doing with the earned money. But we need to know that biblical profit is earned righteously as well as spent righteously. Your donations and goodwill offerings very little have to do with your transformation. That means that you are at least making an effort, and then that is precious. But the number one most important thing for God is you. What happens to you while you are earning biblical profit in a righteous way? And what happens to you when you give that money away for different purposes, righteously, obediently, according to God's will? And this is where I draw the line between Christian entrepreneurs and biblical entrepreneurs. Christians, entrepreneurs, live in a fictionary assuming of what traditionally thought of is Christian. And biblical entrepreneurs actually sit down and study the Bible. They take time to dissect the blueprint, the business blueprint that God left behind, and act accordingly. Now that is biblical entrepreneurship. And I was hoping that I'm going to get to this in a lot shorter amount of time. But I have to leave it for tomorrow because I have spoken nearly 23 minutes already. What exactly is Jesus' blueprint in the 4 books that has been written of his life is going to be tomorrow's subject. And I find this the most important topic, not only for doing business or becoming a true and real disciple of God, but if you grow to understand the magnitude of how close this particular study is to God's heart, and you love God as much as I do, then you cannot help it, but you have to fall in love with biblical entrepreneurship. And that might happen tomorrow when I'm bringing you the legacy talk number 3, and that will be on this legacy talk will be is actually, I'm going to title it Jesus Blueprint, because it is in there and I'm going to reveal it to you. Thank you very much for hanging in there, listening and learning with me. I hope that you caught this video on the day it was made, but if you are watching the replay, you will still find it extremely enriching. Thank you for being here.